So, Assalamu alaikum viewers, welcome to Bayat Ghadeer special. Today we've got a special lineup. We've got a new brother Abdullah, who's been meaning to join us for a little while. Before I introduce this brother, I was just going to say for the next hour or so, you'll be listening to Christmas carols. And that's why Dag's got his headphones on, because in secrecy, he's actually listening to Christmas carols in the background. And we can have Brother Ryan dressed up as Santa Claus by the end of the show, hopefully.
That's definitely not going to happen.
That's definitely not going to happen, no. Okay,
Sorry, guys.
So without further ado, guys, I personally thought this is a very important topic to have because there's a lot of misconceptions about Muslims not believing in Jesus. And obviously, Jesus, may peace and blessings be upon him, is a central figure within the Muslim doctrine. But before I go into today's discussion about Christmas in itself, I want to pass on to Brother Abdullah. Brother Abdullah, can you please introduce yourself? Just give us a bit of a background in terms of.
Sure.
Okay. Mic to you, inshallah, brother. Go ahead.
All right. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Akeem Abdullah Rashid Smith, and I'm from Nashville, Tennessee. That's in the United States. I'm here today with these brothers just to discuss Christmas a bit. And I'm actually from a Sunni background, but I became Shia, alhamdulillah, later on in life. So I think that there's a bit of insight I may have to offer on this topic.
What made you become Shia though, bro?
Well, originally I was trying to sift through I think we all go through this phase. You try to look at all different schools of thought and see what exactly is in line with the Quran and the Quran and history. So I'm looking through different things, and I happen to come across, and a lot of you all have your opinions on these different figures. I came across different people like, for instance, Yasser Habib, which I'm thinking like this guy's out of his mind. And I look at these videos, and then I start to do a bit more research and read a bit more. And I find out that you can actually prove a lot of the points in Shiism through a lot of what's in Sunni sources. So that just kind of opened my heart. And the more that I saw that it was in line with the Quran and, what I saw as the true history of Islam, because really, if you look at the history of any people, no people are 100% perfect, except for, those who are infallible. So, I felt like that the history I was fed growing up was not really something that seemed to fit with my logic. And I'm a student of history in general. So, never in any situation have I seen that a group of people are going to stay loyal to a leader after his demise. So, why is it different in this circumstance? So that just got me thinking a lot more. And eventually I studied a bit more, and I decided that this is the true way. So that's when I began to turn towards learning from the Ahlul Bayt, alhamdulillah. So
nice, bro. And the thing is, when it comes to guys like Sheikh Yasser and stuff like that, even if you don't agree with him politically or other people politically and stuff, Imam Ali, I believe it was, alayhi salam, he said that look at what's being said, not who's saying it. You know what I mean? So it's more important to look at what the knowledge is that you're getting from it, because that's the more important thing. You know what I mean? Even people that the Shia traditionally hate arguably did good things sometimes in their life. You know what I mean? It's just about, they may have fought in certain battles that they didn't run away from and stuff like that. So they have to, you know what I mean? There are elements in that in everyone. So, but yeah, that's really cool, man. And what you try to do was find that consistency as well, which is what led me to where I am. I'm sure that's how Doug got here as well. And as Moore said, was born this way, but whatever. And hopefully today, inshallah, we'll be able to try to find some consistency.
I think I'm the only person who's kind of left out here to some extent. Maybe I shouldn't maybe I actually shouldn't be on this panel today. I mean, I haven't really hosted a show for a little while. Normally, Mr. Sayyid Hassan Buhari's taken that position for a bit, because that's just not me. I'm not really a talkative type of person. I'm not like you, Ryan. I'm not like Brother Abdullah.
Are you
especially.
trying to say I talk too much?
Yeah, just slightly, just slightly.
I'm trying to lead into. I was leading into something, the intro for the show.
I
I was
know,
like,
I know.
we
But
might have, and then you just cut me off right before it.
I know, Abdullah. Just on a quick point, there was something about your grandfather which I found quite interesting as well, and I've discussed this with you before. Tell us a little
Mhm.
about your grandfather and who he was and what
Well,
happened.
my grandfather actually, he grew up Christian, like most people here in the States. Then he, right around the mid 70s or so, he began to learn about the Nation of Islam. So he joined the Nation of Islam, and over time, after Elijah Muhammad's death, he actually the organization was taken over by Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace D. Muhammad. Now, a lot of people don't know this, but if you read the autobiography of Malcolm X, for instance, he mentions speaking to Wallace Muhammad about going to Hajj and these things, because people don't know this, but Elijah Muhammad was actually having his children learn Arabic from people who were over from the Middle East. So he knew that the things that he was teaching weren't exactly, of course, in line with the Quran. And if you listen to him speak, he rarely even says anything from the Quran, which is another interesting point. But yeah, Wallace C. Muhammad, he eventually he saw the light, and he realized that, well, not the full light, but he at least saw that, he's committing the biggest sin, which is shirk. So he decided to transition most of the Nation of Islam to Sunniism, and my grandfather, along with a lot of other people, joined them. And Farrakhan joined for a short moment. And Farrakhan is the current leader of the Nation of Islam. For those of you who may not know, but later Farrakhan decided to go back to the Nation of Islam and to those roots and kind of bring people back with him. But the majority of the African American people who follow the Nation of Islam, such as my grandfather, they all became Sunnis and they learned Arabic, including my grandfather, who taught himself much of the Arabic that he knew. So it was definitely a blessing to grow up with him and kind of learn just the transition that someone can have from being Christian to being in the Nation of Islam, then to actually accepting Islam, or at least for Islam that's free from shirk for the most part. So
You had the opportunity to also meet Malcolm X's. Was it his grandson or?
yes, his grandson. Yes, I met his name is also Malcolm as well, and I actually was able to meet him at a mosque growing up. So yeah, I was about 16 or 17 years old, and I'll never forget that we went to the mosque one day, and he was a guest speaker there. And he actually said that he had been to prison. I think he was in a federal prison, which is pretty rough. It was a pretty rough prison he was in, and he decided to do what a lot of inmates do and kind of go back to his roots, because he was raised a Muslim. So of course, in prison, a lot of the Salafiyah, they run a lot of the things going on in the prisons. And he saw one brother who was kind of set apart from everyone else. And so he went to this brother. He said, what is that you're doing, what you're reading? People said, don't approach this brother. But he said, I'm a Shia, and I'm reading Peshawar Nights. So Brother Malcolm, he actually picked up Peshawar Nights, and he became Shia shortly afterwards. And I actually prayed next to him. I thought it was the craziest thing that he was praying with his hands down. It was my first time seeing that. But yeah, he was actually an interesting brother, and may Allah have mercy on him. So
Inshallah, I mean.
No longer with us.
Inshallah, I mean. So I want to come to today's topic, which is about Christmas. And obviously I prepared certain questions for you brothers, because all of you brothers have pretty much come from a non-Muslim background to some extent, or you have family members who are not Muslim. So, one of the biggest, I would say, misconceptions that a lot of non-Muslims have, in particular, about Jesus, may peace and blessings be upon him, in Islam, is that basically he doesn't have like a central role for Muslims. And obviously we can write libraries of books, or we can do so many shows just about the personality of Jesus in Islam. But before I begin, it's funny because we've got two Australian brothers with us now, brother Doug and Ryan. But I had a T-shirt which someone gave me which said, "I love Jesus." And I was approached by a member of the public, and they said, "Are you Muslim?" Well, they knew who I was, but they're like, "But you're a Muslim. Why are you wearing a T-shirt that says I love Jesus. So, and obviously I explained everything to him. So for him, this was like, a really big surprise. So I think it's quite unfortunate that you could say it's kind of one of the biggest kept secrets to people. And that is that many people are not aware that, Jesus is such a central and important figure for Muslims. I mean, he's included within the Ulul Azm prophets. So obviously, as Muslims, we believe in 124,000 prophets which were sent to mankind. Every nation, had a messenger. 124,000 normally is a figure that's generally given, but nevertheless, Jesus is included within the elite five with Adam, Abraham, Noah, Moses. So, without further ado, what I'd like to do, Brother Abdullah, is I want to be asking you some questions now.
Okay.
Is that, when it comes to, Christianity and Islam, we kind of have a similar narrative in terms of Jesus's birth. How did you, what's your position about the whole incident in terms of how he was born in a manger and et cetera, compared to the whole Muslim narrative where his mother, may peace and blessings be upon her, Mary, went to the wilderness, and then obviously she gave birth to Jesus under a palm tree?
Well, I mean, when you compare these two stories, I believe that the story of the manger and the three wise men, a lot of those elements they have their roots in different stories from before the time of Isa alayhi salam, and with those stories, these are fantastic stories. That they have a lot to teach, but they're not necessarily. They can't necessarily be seen as historically accurate if these stories have been transmitted by people of different cultures, usually pagan cultures, before he was documented to have existed. So I think that's really the main difference. With you don't really see a lot of material from the Muslim narrative that predates his time, versus the story of the manger and the three wise men, and the gifts and the time. A lot of that you'll see with story. You'll find those stories with similar figures, well, not similar figures, but different pagan figures whose stories are being circulated before the time he was born. So I think that's the main thing. And also it's just as miraculous, if not more, than that story to, that you have this woman who's a virgin, she's giving birth, and then, God approaches her through an angel and gives her comfort and helps her successfully birth the child with no help. Think about the time period that all this is going on as well. So, there's just a lot of different aspects of it that are just really amazing and really miraculous, including even I believe that Mary, she actually ate the dates. And the dates are something that have been scientifically shown to be a great thing for a woman to eat after she's given birth. So, subhanAllah, the Muslim story is definitely one that is, like I tell people, you'll find that it is just as amazing as the one that you've grown up listening to, if not more.
Yeah, mashallah, that's quite it's quite beautifully put. It's interesting you touched on the issue about the miraculous birth, and once again, I believe when it comes to the Christian and Muslims, they kind of have like a similar narrative to some extent about the birth of Jesus. I could be wrong about this, but I don't think the Jews believed in the miraculous birth of Jesus, may peace and blessings be upon him, and I don't think they also accept that he fulfilled certain prophecies. One of the reasons why they didn't accept him. For example, the word, I think, is it logos, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
Muslims, we believe that, for example, he's the logos, like the word of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I don't think our Jewish brothers have this particular opinion or viewpoint about him. So this question I'd like to likewise ask Brother Doug. How do you see the whole Muslim narrative about the birth of Jesus with the Christian incident, and how you reconcile the two stories? And as you from a Christian background yourself, Brother Doug, please tell us what your thoughts are.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Just in you're talking about, just I'll go back to a point you made prior about people not understanding that Muslims believe in the Prophet Jesus or Isa alayhi salam. Was quite surprised because before I came to learn about Islam, I had no clue as well that he was a major prophet in the religion of Islam, and believing in his prophethood is an article of faith. And also in my sort of discovery of monotheism, that was one of the key factors that really brought me close to Islam, was the fact that that I could still have Jesus, but in his real form, if you can understand what I'm trying to say. So wasn't missing out on Jesus. You know, I'm saying I didn't have to reject Jesus. I didn't have to, he was still a prophet. He was still Messiah. He still did miracles. I can still talk to my Christian parents about the miracles of Jesus, and we can talk about Jesus on a level we can find some common ground. So yeah, that was the point I wanted to make. It was, as you said, it's surprising that a lot of people who don't know much about Islam don't know that fact that, yeah, we do believe that Jesus, peace be upon him, was a prophet. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that. But going back to the point that you made about, say, the birth narrative, there are two different narratives from two different gospels in the Christian Bible. One of them would be that the shepherds were told by an angel to go and visit Mary and Joseph in the stable, and so they came and visited him. But then there's an extra story where the wise men, it doesn't say three wise men, by the way, it's tradition that makes them three, but it was three gifts that were given to Jesus in the story. But that happened, they came and visited him in the house. If you actually read the gospel, it actually says they visited him in the house. And if you actually follow the narrative, it actually says that it was around about 2 years later, because they gave the timing to Herod, and that's how he calculated how old to kill the babies 2 years and under.
That's a good point. That's a good point, Doug. I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's mentioned in one of the Gospels about when the noblemen approached him. He wasn't a baby. He was a child. I believe that's what the passage actually mentions.
It's a toddler, yeah.
And it couldn't have been in the December period, because that's another thing which people often believe, that Jesus was born in December. Yet, if we look at the historic evidence, it suggests otherwise.
Yeah, because the shepherds had their flocks out at night, so that was around the time in the first story. But what seems to happen in tradition is they all sort of combine the stories together, and you see a lot of nativity scenes having the shepherds there and the wise men there, and they sort of just amalgamate into one sort of traditional story, and you have nativity plays and a whole culture and what do you say? Culture and stories get sort of intertwined, and yeah. So usually you see nativity stories as, the wise men arriving just after the shepherds, and yeah. So and when I was younger, being a very analytical, logical person I was when I was younger, I always used to correct my Sunday school teachers, and used to say this is wrong. This shouldn't be. They came 2 years later. I got into a lot of trouble trying to correct my teachers on biblical knowledge, and yeah. So, but yeah, but then coming to the story, the Islamic account was, for me, it wasn't like sensationalized. It was very simple, but very holy, very. I'm trying to think of the words to explain it. It wasn't some extravagant story. It was very basic. basically the same as this, the angel coming in and speaking to Mary was the same, and her saying that how could she have a child because she hadn't known a man, so she was a virgin, she was pure. But what I actually found very interesting was the baby Jesus, at least, and I'm speaking in the cradle. That was my most aha moment, and I can understand why people would refer to him as the Word of God, because he spoke the words from God as a baby as well. So from earliest times, he would have had that reputation of being a prophet, even from being a baby. If you can understand what I'm trying to get at. So I thought, there's like an aha moment, like that's why people refer to him as the Word of God, because he spoke God's words as an infant and, throughout his life. But yeah, that was like the thing that really stood out for me.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm glad you kind of mentioned the whole thing about, again, the miraculous birth and having no father. And obviously, Mary, may peace and blessings be upon her, being a virgin. These accounts are for us, have been mentioned in the Holy Quran. So it's something pivotal for us. We have to believe this in order to be Muslims. If we don't believe Mary was pure and she was a virgin and Jesus being born from, miraculous birth, we couldn't identify ourselves as being Muslims. Not to mention, the countless other things which you mentioned about Jesus, blessings be upon him, speaking at birth, which is, as Shia Muslims, for example, this is one of the points we always argue with other schools of thought when, they claim that the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, reached a certain age before he was a prophet. For us, obviously we always identified him as a prophet, even as a child, through his nature, through his actions, through his habits, that even when, the non-Muslims approached him, the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, said, if I told you there was a battalion that was going to be coming from behind this mountain, would you believe me? And they said, yes, we accept that you're a truthful person. So, I find the account of Jesus' birth, about his prophethood at a young age, I can very easily, as a Shia, kind of link it to the early days of the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him. Not to say that the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him, was born from virgin birth. No, that's a whole different thing. Hazrat Isa alayhi salam, this was one of his exclusive miracles. So, Brother Ryan, did you want to add anything to the other brothers' points? Or?
I think what we have to look at when, by the way, Assalamu alaikum to everyone watching. But I think what we have to look at when comparing the two narratives of the Muslims, and we have varying narratives within ourselves as well. I think that should be established. When looking at the narrative, the first thing that we should do when comparing to the Christians is seeing what we have in common. The boys already touched on what we have in common. The reason why I say this is because when you first start to look at the commonalities between the two faiths and the two narratives, or many narratives, whatever it is, the number of narratives there are, this is going to help in the bigger picture in regards to cooperating in a multicultural society, a pluralistic society, and etc. And that's something that we should always strive to do first before anything else. Then when you look at the differences within the narrative, like, for example, say according to our narrative, say the Maryam alayhi salam, she was in the temple, which is an important thing for Muslims to remember too. If they understood biblical scripture more, they would understand who was allowed to be in the temple and why only those certain people were allowed in the temple. And this is something we can talk about later, inshallah. But she was in the temple, and then she was forbade to stay in the temple, and then she went out and gave birth to her son, the Prophet Isa, may Allah hasten his reappearance. And out in the field, which is different to the Christian narrative where he was born in a manger and all this kind of stuff. So it's interesting. If we can start to see that 80% of the narrative is the same, then we can start to critically analyze where the differences come from and how we can go about rectifying that and coming to a consistent worldview, not just for ourselves, but for all of us together. Because we all, whether that we're Christian or we're Muslim, some like Protestant sects might not consider that there is a reappearance of Nabi Isa, but all Orthodox schools do. And so if we all want this personality to come back, we should all want to be on the same side when he does. That's the whole point. You know what I mean? We really tend to forget this and get caught up on the little aspects and stuff. And the boys also too talked about how there was certain aspects that were found in pagan mythology before, or et cetera, et cetera. And I think what we should look at also is when thinking of these things or seeing that there's similarities, it's not necessarily that something's stolen. Because if we start doing that, we fall into a trap with our own narratives. Because people can just say, well, those guys stole the same kind of concept from us. You know what I mean? So pagans can be like the Jews stole from us. The Jews can be like the Christians stole from us. The Christians can be like the Muslims stole from us. Just as we say that the Baha'i stole from us. You know what I mean? So just because there's reoccurrences in history repeats itself. This is the most common thing, and the symbolism will always repeat itself. Just as the days of the week will continuously repeat, such symbolism will always repeat. So one of the most beautiful things about the narrative of Nabi Isa, may Allah hasten his reappearance, is that this concept of where he wasn't allowed to be born in the temple, but he was still born of a miraculous birth, etc. This is a good lead up for people to look into the birth of Imam Ali, alayhi salam, because there's a lot of similarities there. But it shows the Imam Ali's status, how it. Well, we can talk about that later.
Ryan, you said Mary's account, as in she wasn't allowed to give birth in the temple. Is that a biblical narrative that she was prevented because?
No, I believe that was. I don't know if that's in the biblical sources. It's definitely in our sources.
And I think technically too, she wasn't officially allowed to be in the temple, but they built a room adjacent to her so she could be near the temple. I do believe. I don't know if that's correct or that's what I remember.
No, in ours, she was, according to the Quranic narrative, she was in the temple. I think that's from memory. I'll have to double check that. I'll get back to everyone. I'm very sure that she was in the temple.
I knew she did serve in the temple, but in the temple, there was different compartments of the temple that she wasn't allowed to be in, just through Jewish law.
Yeah. But she still served. Okay, understood. I think she served in the temple. There was aspects of the temple she couldn't be in, but regardless, the fact that she was even allowed within those perimeters is still something to be looked at, because there's certain based on halakha, you can't go into places if you're not from a certain tribe or lineage, etc. Correct?
Well, and being a woman as well.
Yep.
But what I'm saying is, like the Christian narrative is that Isa, peace and blessings be upon him, was from the tribe of Judah. But if you really go deep into Mary alayhi salam's genealogy, you'll find that it's
Levitic.
Levitic.
Yeah.
I don't know if you brothers can clarify in this point as well, because we mentioned Jesus, and that's how we come to know the name of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. Yet this name Jesus, it's not explicitly been mentioned in Muslim literature. Ryan, have you done any research on this particular thing? No.
So, I have. I've done plenty of research on this, and we've talked about this in depth. Look, at the end of the day, this topic itself is it deserves more than even one episode just for itself.
Yeah,
This
we'll
is
we'll come to it at some point, maybe.
yeah, this is a very intense, and it's I think in a show like this, which is it's a Christmas special, it's supposed to be something just light and etc. for Christians and Muslims to watch together.
I think it'd be too overwhelming.
I don't think we should do something like that.
Yeah.
I think we just say Jesus for the ease of other people understanding what we're talking about, because a lot of people know him as Jesus, or
At the end of the day, he is the Messiah that was sent to Bani Israel, and inshallah ta'ala, he will be coming back, and with the others that were taken from this earth alive, and but regarding the nativity and all this kind of stuff, they're both incredibly beautiful stories, and they're both incredibly symbolic. If you look into, I highly recommend. I had a sheikh that's also a convert recommend a Orthodox Christian YouTube channel to me, and I've been watching a lot of it lately. It's called the individual's name is Jonathan Pageau, Pageau, and he is an iconographer. So he was born a Protestant Christian. He became an Orthodox Christian later of the Eastern Orthodox. And he was making statues, and that's what he does, and he blah blah blah. And now he has this YouTube channel, and he talks about symbology that you can find everywhere, and it's how it just repeats itself, whether it be in religious scriptures, whether it be in movies, wherever you find it, nursery rhymes. 100% you look into it. As Muslims, we have a duty upon ourselves to understand our own deen, but also to open your own mind. You should be studying the others. We're supposed to be the pinnacles of society, not just in our akhlaq, but also in our knowledge and our iman, etc. So I highly recommend people check that out for a little bit of mind opening and etc. You can open your mind without adopting everything that you let in, So yeah.
Yeah, so this kind of goes on to my second question to Brother Abdullah, and that is the evolution of the whole Christmas celebration. And what I mean by that is, if you go to different cultures and communities, they have their own way of celebrating the birth of Jesus. Peace and blessings be upon him. Some people put up Christmas trees. Some people hang stockings. Various practices which, as you're familiar to. What do you know about the evolution of Christmas, and would you think that some of these practices would be approved by Jesus? May peace and blessings be upon him. Because we know that Jesus Christ was a very simple person, right? He lived life very simply, and he wasn't very lavish. He didn't very lavishly or ostentatiously. So, what would you say about some of these practices that present day Christians celebrate? How they celebrate the birth of Jesus?
Yeah. For starters, originally Christmas has its roots in what I think it's pretty well known that Christmas has its roots in different pagan origins. And when I say pagan, mainly sort of European origins, and really it's not really uncommon for a lot of different cultures to have these winter celebrations where there's a time of the year where there's not really much work to do. There's food that's been stored up, so people can kind of take this time to celebrate during the winter solstice. Now, as far as I've read, I've seen that when you have Christianity come about, and you have Catholicism, especially as it tends to spread, a lot of these priests will interact with these different cultures, and in order to help spread the message of Christianity, they will kind of combine a lot of Christian concepts with the concepts that the people already had, so it makes it a lot more easy for them to accept this new religion and these new concepts. So it's like they can keep a lot of things and really combine them with Christianity in order to make it just make it a bit easier for them to digest. Now, as far as a lot of the practices go, there's a lot of different things that kind of they get adopted from other cultures and later on they get added. For instance, I actually used to work at a museum. There was a U.S. president. His name was Andrew Jackson. So I worked at Andrew Jackson's house. He's actually the guy on a $20 bill. I don't know if you've all have seen that, but in Andrew Jackson's time, people actually didn't have a Christmas tree, for instance. And around Christmas time, it actually it could be you didn't really want to give gifts to too many people if you were a free person because that could be disrespectful. As in that time, the main people who took Christmas the most seriously were people who were actually enslaved. And the reason why is, if a person was enslaved, the Christmas time is, it's in the winter, so it's a time where, people don't have to work as often. They can also get some more gifts, and they also can go visit family. So during that time period, most people really didn't celebrate Christmas as much, simply because it was looked down upon, since it was a holiday that was taken seriously by slaves because they have time to visit their family. Some people can, they couldn't visit their own wives and children unless it was around the Christmas time, really. So, there was a big tradition in that time as far as slavery goes. And then you have to, and to push it even further back, a lot of people don't know this, but here in America, it was founded by a group of people called the Puritans. We call them the Pilgrims. They were actually very, very strict Protestants who had immigrated over from, Great Britain and all over those areas. And a lot of these people, they actually outlawed Christmas. And the reason being was because they said that there was a lot of drunkenness on Christmas. They knew it wasn't a Christian holiday, mind you. They also knew that it had its roots in paganism, but they didn't necessarily reject it for that reason. This was just due to the drunkenness, due to the fact that there could be a lot of fights breaking out, things of that nature. So that, in their minds, they're thinking, these are Christians who themselves have kind of outlawed this holiday due to the fact that they don't think that the way people celebrate it really reflects Christian principles, due to, a lot of the things that come from pagan origin. So I think that's one thing that is that's very important for a lot of people, especially in, here in my society. A lot of strong conservative Christians will tend to say that there's a war on Christmas and that it should be preserved as a strong part of Christianity, when in fact the people who founded this country themselves had outlawed it simply because it didn't really reflect what they felt were Christian values. So
that's great, wonderful, bro. I'm going to pass on to Brother Doug. If Brother Doug wants to add anything to that point, I think Brother Abdul covered quite a bit there. But what would you say about the evolution of some of these Christmas celebrations from culture to community, and whether or not, if we are remembering the birth of Jesus, which of course for us as Muslims is something, very important. And I think I was discussing this earlier before the start of the show, and that was on the topic of Mawlid. If you look at within the Shia traditions, we have these narrations with Ahlul Bayt talk about, remembering them in the times of happiness, and obviously in the time of grief as well, in the time of sadness. I think the general position within Sunni scholarship, with the exception of Salafis and maybe even Deobandi, they don't really celebrate the birth of the Holy Prophet, may peace and blessings be upon him. Yeah, if you go according to a lot of the older opinions of some of the big scholars within Sunnism, like Imam Suyuti, for example, and other scholars, they had no issue about celebrating the Mawlid, the birth of the prophets. But having said that, if we were to take the opinion that celebrating the birth of Jesus, may peace and blessings be upon him, is something which is not problematic for one school of thought, how do we deal with some of these practices that we see now, where people have kind of, they've exaggerated, they've gone to great measures in exaggerating, certain practices as part of the Christmas celebration?
Yeah, just just to give a bit of background of where I'm coming from, I pretty much gave up Christmas celebrations before I even, while I was still a Christian. So it hasn't been a big deal in my family, well, me and my wife's marriage. We sort of, so I'm coming from that sort of background where I sort of rejected the Christmas tradition and practices just due to personal research about how Christmas was started. I wanted to be a quote unquote authentic Christian, sola scriptura, if you find it in the hardcore Protestant. So practices that I didn't find in the Bible, I sort of rejected. But just looking back at history, I think the word syncretism is the word where they have two different cultures and they blend the two cultures or beliefs together. You have that quite a lot through history, especially with Christmas, because Christmas was a very late celebration and introduced into Christianity. It wasn't around in the first couple of centuries from my memory, and it only started becoming a sort of a feast day of the Catholic Church in late December. So, late December, and then you'll find that Orthodox Christians have a different Christmas, as that's because they changed calendars, and so they actually have their Christmas in early January. So yeah, I don't have too much to speak about that. Like for me personally, when I was a Christian, I sort of just did the research myself. Found that it wasn't really Christian to begin with, so I sort of just rejected it out of that. That's me personally, anyway. And I sort of carried that over into my Islam, because I didn't find it to be an Islamic holiday, so I didn't really include it. So that's just me personally. Other people might have different backgrounds or upbringings, but yeah, that's my experience.
Ryan, I'm going to bring you on here because you seem very quiet at the moment. So
yeah, man. Right. So when it comes to celebrating Christmas, right? So we've already established, the boys have said that there's obviously pagan elements to the Catholic celebration of Christmas, or the origins of it. I think what we have to understand too is that all religions kind of have this, all Abrahamic faiths have suffered from this when they've expanded very quickly or when they've been institutionalized. As 12ers, we would argue the same about Sunni Islam. We would argue that there's a lot of innovation that had come into play after the death of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wa ali. What I believe happened with the Christians, if you look at our riwayat and it says the date of Nabi Isa's birth, it's either the 25th of Dhul Qadar or the 25th of Dhul Hijjah. I believe it's the 25th of Dhul Qadar. So we already have this number 25 in here as it is. From memory, the celebration of Christmas on the 25th of December didn't start until like the 4th century under the rule of Emperor Constantine. I think just before, just after this time, I think it was just after the Pope officially declared that this was the time that we're going to start celebrating this thing. We see a parallel with Islamic thought when it came to certain things being celebrated, not necessarily because they were actually on that date, but because the caliph of the time decided this is how we're going to do it. And it was just to make something formalized so everyone could all just do something together. Now, one could argue the intention there is good because it's unifying everyone, but at the same time, it's not actually based on anything. And I think this is one of the problems that we have with Christmas being celebrated on this date. Keep in mind, not all Christians celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December. Some celebrate it, like in Orthodoxy, they'll celebrate it 1 week later, 2 weeks later, and that's actually changed throughout history. So going back to, if we want to give like a benefit of the doubt theory, which is what I'm going to do for now, just so we can start to think like the Christians weren't all a bunch of mushriks that changed everything and all this kind of stuff. We need to remember that Christianity didn't start off, as soon as Nabi Isa was ascended into heaven, according to both sources, both Islamic and Christian, there was no monolith of Christian thought. It was an array of different, varying, competing schools of thought. And it was from this quagmire of opinions of the spirituality where people had different rituals and all this kind of stuff, and it didn't actually get formalized until, I've obviously said, until a bit later. So let's just say they already did know. They had the Islamic understanding of the date. But what happened was, of being the 25th of a month. But what happened was the ruler of the Roman Empire, who was not just ruling over Christians, he was ruling over pagans as well, had to find a compromise. So let's say that he chose the 25th of a month where the winter solstice was just around the corner, and that's why they started doing it. Now, is it right to do it that way? No. From a spiritual point of view, no. But it could have been that the intention was to unify the empire of that time. So we shouldn't be, belittling Christians and all this kind of stuff because of these innovations that we might find in their history. But what we can do is that we can say, look, the intention may have been, there was this. We know that your intention, no Christian, no Christian cares about all of this stuff. They're doing it, and when they're doing it, it may have been very commercialized nowadays, and there may be a lot of drinking and stuff like this. But you have to understand too that their intention isn't to destroy themselves with alcohol, even when they do. And it's not, the intention isn't to, they're not thinking about how they're making themselves poor by spending all this lavish money on gifts and stuff like that. The original essence of everything was to give, just as the aesthetic Nabi Isa would give and would own little to nothing. And it was to celebrate the birth. And even Nabi Isa, may Allah hasten his repentance, even he said, salam on me on my birth. So this is to celebrate and commemorate the birth. They just go about it in a way that is problematic and seemingly contradictory to the apparent way that Isa himself would do it. Right? But we've got to remember too, this is why it's important to read Christian scripture if we're going to talk about Christians, because it especially in the Protestant that came later, the Protestant schools of Reformation and stuff, they're very faith driven. So it wasn't really so much what you did. It's your intention was there, and that the faith was what, as long as you do this, as long as you have faith, it's fine. You know what I mean? Now Islam had to come and correct that and resolve that. But this is where we have to understand, when this is where we need to understand human psychology, sociology, and all these kind of things to help bring us all together. Because at the end of the day, it's going to be very hard to argue with someone like, yeah, you have a pagan holiday and all this kind of stuff. It's like, yeah, but Christ wouldn't care if we're just giving gifts to each other, we're getting drunk. At least we're all being good to each other. We're not going around bombing people. And that's a pretty decent argument, in my opinion. But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, like, we need to stand by what we believe in. You know what I mean? When it comes to celebrating this actual holiday itself, you know, in the 12th school of thought, there's not a full consensus regarding celebrating it. And it might be that certain scholars aren't respected by the majority of schools or whatever. But regardless, they're there anyway. They're little, you can argue that they're a black stain on our history, but it doesn't matter. They still said that you can celebrate Christmas in certain ways, right? With the Christians and stuff, as long as you don't do this and this, which is just a more lenient version of what everyone else has already said. You can celebrate it, but don't do this, this, and this. Okay? So they want to celebrate the birth of the Prophet Isa. We want to celebrate the birth of the Prophet Isa. They just do it one time of the year. We do it another time of the year. How about we let them do it, encourage them to do it in a way that is halal without trying to force ourselves onto them and our things.
I like that approach, Ryan.
Yeah, we should encourage it, because this is if you think about it, we shouldn't split the world up into being about East and West, because Allah is the God of the East and the West. We should look at the world as becoming very secularized. The West is just incredibly secularized at the moment, but the East is trying to. There's movements that are coming to be secularized and stuff. The Christmas and Easter are the few things left that the West has that is religious. At least in the more established parts of the West, like America and Britain.
I was saying the same thing to Abdullah earlier, and that is, for example, I was approached by a colleague at work who said to me, Ali, do you celebrate Christmas? I said, why do you assume that I wouldn't? So he goes, but you're not Muslim, you're Christian. I was like, okay, but are you Christian? And they replied, no, they're not. So I said, well, in order for me to be a Muslim, it's essential for me to believe in Jesus. So who has more right to celebrate the birth of Jesus, me or you? You don't even believe him to be a messenger of God. You don't even believe in God, let alone him being a messenger of God.
Yeah.
You did make some, interesting points, and that is, perhaps advising the community to refrain from perhaps some of the practices which over time they, due to culture, they've kind of introduced, as part of their official, Christmas celebration.
If you look at, for example, it's if Muslims wanted to start really helping bridge the gap, in my opinion, if you already like to celebrate the birth of the Prophet and stuff like this, okay, but you do it on the Islamic calendar, that's fine. You understand that the Christians have their own calendar. Now, you can do it with the intention of not adopting what they do as making it part of your own Islamic practices. But what you can do is you can accommodate for their celebrations, their Eids, but in a way that it doesn't allow for them to be going beyond the limits and transgress. So, for example, if a Muslim center was to hold like a Christmas thing, people would know, or at least you can tell them, that it's a dry area, like it's a dry venue, meaning there's no alcohol. You can have certain things where you talk about the Prophet Isa alayhi salam and stuff like this, and the birth and all this kind of stuff. You can do like a Muslim nativity scene, etc. We do the same. We replay Karbala all the time, but why don't we do the nativity scene? It's ridiculous. Like we pick and choose parts that we want to talk about, but we won't talk about the whole picture. So when people think that Muslims don't care about Christ, it's because we don't do a very good job of showing that we do.
Yeah,
same goes for the.
Right. I was brought up in a school where every year they used to practically rehearse the whole. Used to do a play for, the birth of Jesus. Yeah, okay, fair enough. We may not necessarily agree with all the accounts of what happened, but still there was something there.
Exactly, but you can show them that.
It's beautiful.
Yeah, you can, and what's cool is white people like culture. They like, and look, most Western people are white. They like, white people find it really cool and exotic. Like, oh yeah, we can go check this out. Like, oh, this, there's this and this, or like, whatever. They love it, especially old white people.
They don't have any?
No. White people. Listen,
I'm just
this,
joking.
no. This is what it is. No. I know, but listen, it's not that white people don't have culture. It's that
They
culture. Do. No, it's the thing is that culture is often conflicting. So when the West became increasingly secularized, they decided that they're going to back down on their own tribal elements with each other. So they created this very secularized community. So when new immigrants come in and they seem like the aliens in our periphery, that very odd and strange with all their cultural things, if they don't adhere to this thing that everyone else already agreed on was conforming and like a compromise, it seems a bit weird. It's not that we don't have culture or history and stuff like that. My ancestors were Vikings and they probably went around raping half the world. And also had their pagan gods and all this kind of stuff and had their own little traditions and all this kind of stuff. It's through time and through having to assimilate with different cultures and etc. that they had to sacrifice their cultures. You know what I mean? They also stole a lot of culture on the way. That might be the Viking element.
Right, this kind of linked to my next question, and that is about your Viking ancestors, and that is as people, like obviously you yourself, you come from a Christian background, brother Doug. How did you guys deal with Christmas, the Christmas period? Because obviously, as Muslims, you have your family members celebrating Christmas. How do you deal with that? Actually, I'm going to ask this to brother Abdullah. Abdullah, how do you deal with family members who are celebrating Christmas where you may not necessarily be celebrating yourself? Mm-hmm. You might be celebrating it, but how do you deal with it? What do you do? Stay out the house 24 hours? Like what?
Yeah. So, my family, it was really, the only Muslims in my family were, myself, my mother, my grandparents, of course, my mother's brother, my uncle, and that's pretty much it. Just pretty much my grandparents and my kind of like my mother, my very nuclear family. So I kind of saw it approached several different ways. Now I remember at one point, what my mother would do every single year, she would, we didn't celebrate Christmas, but I guess she didn't want me to feel, like as a child left out. So she would still buy me a small gift every year on Christmas. So that's one way I saw it approaching. As I got older, I was like, I connected with more family. It was actually my uncle's wife. Her family, the way what they would do for Eid was amazing. On the Eid, what they would do is, they would have a lot of gifts. They would decorate a lot, and they would have a very kind of, if you're a kid, a very great Eid for a child. And so it's kind of like their children never felt left out around the Christmas time because their Eids were so amazing. So I think that, in my family, where we kind of like, we didn't really do a lot for the Eids, I always felt left out during Christmas time. So it's like my mother would, she would buy a gift for me, which is kind of like, in my opinion now, stepping over the bounds. So I think that's one thing, like maybe, as Muslims, we can kind of make sure that we do a lot for our own holidays to not, to so that our children won't sort of, go towards this holiday in a way that's going to go against their beliefs, that's going to cross the boundaries. Now,
Sure.
Also another thing we would do as well, I remember, is we would go to different family member houses. Now, there were other Muslims who say, when you go over their houses during the Christmas time, it's kind of like it's as if you're condoning, the drunkenness and other behaviors. But and what my uncle would say is that this is a time when everyone's off from work. So it's a one time where we all get to be together. So he wanted to be the example in the house when everyone's celebrating Christmas and, they're gambling and they're drinking. He wanted to be the person who would kind of show that, we behave more wholesomely during this holiday. So I think that that's also another good approach as well, to go ahead and be around your families during the holiday. Not necessarily, participate in the gift giving and things of that nature, but at least be there and just behave well while they're behaving one way. So, they may look at you and say, you know, cousin, uh, cousin Ali, or, cousin Halima, these two are kind of behaving a lot differently from us. And I want to know, why are they behaving this way versus us, doing these, which I'm not saying all Christian families do this, but, why a lot of families who do kind of do the more, engage in a lot of the drunkenness and things of that nature, they have the Muslim in their family who's around them at Christmas time, that could just strike, their hearts and mind to want to understand more of what that's about. So I think that that's definitely a great way to do it as well. And then one more thing as well. I remember that I went to a Christian university. It was actually uh, uh, the denomination is affiliated with is called the Church of Christ, and it's a very hard line, kind of very conservative Christian denomination. So every year around Christmas time, I remember our professors would tell us that Christmas is not a Christian holiday, but they would also say Merry Christmas, and they had these, Christmas trees and everything. The campus would be decorated for Christmas, but they would say, this is a holiday where, it's a holiday that we can celebrate, and there's no harm in it, as long as, because the Church of Christ actually doesn't believe in drinking. So there's like, as long as you don't go home and drink and these things, you can do Christmas this way. So, if you're approaching Christians who are more of that mindset, I think that the best thing to do with them is actually have a discussion, because, even though they acknowledge that Christmas wasn't a Christian holiday to them, they still, there's still the concept of Jesus being born on this day that kind of permeates it. So I remember that around Christmas time, it struck up a lot of conversation with the Muslim students. So that's also another good thing.
It kind of leads on to what Ryan's saying, that it kind of opens up the doors of opportunity for discussion.
Mm-hmm.
Brother Doug, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah. Where am I? Sorry, I was just trying to break that. There we go. My mind's actually kicked in there. Christmas. Well, I live with my Christian, elderly Christian parents, and they celebrate Christmas, and my wife and I do not. But that doesn't. I don't want to be a hard line type of person where
Grinch.
A Grinch, or if they want to, like, I don't personally give gifts, but if people, and I have children, I got 3 children, my parents want to give them gifts, and that's, I said to them, if you want to bless my children with gifts, because it's out of a heart of giving, it's out of a heart of wanting to bless my children. I said, that's fine. I'm not going to say no gifts for my children. And when it comes to sort of coming together to have a feed, to have a big feed and gorge yourself, usually I sort of try to make a compromise. Here in Australia, we have a day called Boxing Day. That's on the 26th of December. That's another day. It's a public holiday as well. I think it's a UK tradition. I don't know if they still have it there, but it's sort of carried over to Australia, where families still get together on that day. They play a bit of cricket. Usually there's a test cricket game on or something like that. For me personally,
I take you're a bit of a Scrooge then, Doug.
When it comes to myself and my personal family, I don't give gifts, but I don't be a Scrooge on other people's celebrations and other people's joy, if you can understand what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, of course.
Some people are really hardcore and don't say Merry Christmas to me, or don't give me gifts, or don't even think about saying Merry Christmas or anything like that.
Ryan, Doug, Brother Abdul, I accept gifts, no problems. That's
Yeah, I accept them too. So I feel like a bit of a hypocrite. I won't give them, but I'll take them. But the thing is, though, if someone gives you gifts, and you reject it, you're actually rejecting their opportunity to be a blessing. So they want to be a blessing to you, and you're actually robbing them of doing that by rejecting them. So I don't reject people wanting to be a blessing to me.
That's very nice, bro. That's a very nice sentiment.
But going back to Boxing Day, we just have a feed on Boxing Day, and so for me, that's technically not Christmas; it's the next day. So that's how I get around it. That's my little compromise, because everyone's got a public holiday, so no one's working unless they got suckered in to work on the Boxing Day. But
or you look at it as a day of to do shopping, because there's loads of sales on Doug for Boxing Day.
Yeah, you can do shopping. You can do some shopping. You can have a feed. You can come over and eat the leftovers, because usually there's a lot of families that have multiple Christmases. They go to this family and that family. So what you do is you just go over on the 26th and just eat their leftovers. Help them consume all the amount of.
Remind you of Eid as well.
Yeah, and going back to what Brother Abdullah said about making Eid special for the children, that's very, very important. Being a convert to Islam, my Eids have been pretty dull because I don't have Islamic family. So this is the thing with Christmas too, is that converts, their parents aren't into their Eids as much until they maybe a few years later. So they get bummed out on Eid because they don't have the extended family. And then when it comes to Christmas, if they have a particular stand on celebrating Christmas, then it becomes even harder because you get this nostalgic longing that you used to have for all the things that you remember as a kid. But if you've got some sort of principles that you personally hold on to, then you get sort of bummed out at Christmas. So it's sort of a double whammy sometimes of isolation and loneliness for converts. Sometimes it's self-inflicted, but a lot of times too is that the Muslim community sort of forgets that there are converts who don't have family for Eid. So going back to that is to try and make Eid special for the converts, and if you've got children as well, make that very special for them as well. Yeah.
Ryan, do you want to say anything on this? Or are you done?
No. I'll just quickly say something. Well, when I say quickly, anyway. So the point is, I'm trying to say, it is very hard, especially for converts, to go about balancing their identities. You've got the identity in which you come from, then you have the identity in which you've adopted. I recall, I think it was last year, my fiance called me up and was like wishing me a happy Eid and stuff like that, and I just didn't get it. Like, for me, these days in the Islamic calendar are just days that I do and don't do things. You know what I mean? Like, I commemorate things and stuff like that, but I don't have that that nostalgia that comes with Eid. So when my fiance was saying that she was, she felt, really sad that I couldn't, celebrate Eid and stuff, I just didn't get it. I didn't understand why she was so upset for me. But at the same time, because as well too, she grew up a long time, since 2000 in Australia. So, she still got to experience somewhat of Christmas and all this kind of stuff, driving around, seeing the lights and all on the houses and all this kind of stuff. But it's definitely not something that a lot of converts, I guess, start out with, at least not in the way that I did. I know there's a lot of converts that have come to Islam through hanging out with Muslims for a long time, so they understand all the, the stuff that comes with it. But it's definitely not something for me. But in regards to actually going about celebrating it, that's incredibly hard. And it's especially when you come from a culture that is already very detached somewhat from religion, and they have a very what one could say is a warped view. Although I believe that my family, in essence, their view of the way they go about Christmas, despite the standard arguing that would happen with most families on Christmas Day, is that it is still about the essence of everything, and it's the getting plastered and all that kind of stuff that I'm sure that everyone does. It's not to the same extent that would happen, but what people have to remember is that Islam is a process. So when someone becomes a Muslim, ideally you would want them to be doing everything from the get-go. But that's just not realistic. And that's just not even how it happened even in the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You know what I mean? So if a convert, can you guys hear me?
I can't.
Yeah. Okay.
I can.
Yeah. So if a convert, keeps, say, convert gives up drinking straight away, fantastic, mashallah, that's a great job, right? You also have to understand that the convert has family that drink. The convert might actually live at home with their family. So this idea that, you can't be in a house with people that drink, it's just not realistic. It's just never going to happen. So we need to really start viewing Islam for all of us, not just converts, but born Muslims as well. It is a process. And we should all be encouraging each other in this process. And we should definitely not be, I think it was one of the Imams defined our deen as being simply hub and nasb. You know what I mean? You have preference for certain things and you have animosity for certain things. But just because you have an animosity for certain things doesn't mean that you cut family ties or something like this, because that's even a greater sin than the sins that the people are committing. You know what I mean? And we really need to reestablish our worldview given the current climate that we're in and the varying circumstances that we're in as an ummah. Because back in the day, like, the drunkenness was not necessarily a problem in the Middle East. You know what I mean? But now you're coming into countries like Britain and Australia and the United States, more so Britain and Australia, it is definitely a problem. And we can't just banish people for, trying to go about it. You have to remember too, converts, they a lot of the time will look at all of the options and then pick Islam. So they've gone through all that study, they picked one, they're trying to do it, and then people are like, no, well, you can't hang out with your family because they're drinking. It's like, bro, what do you want? And on top of that, I'm going to have a go at the born Muslims. I'll tell you what's very hard for me. When my family will say, I don't want to go to this event because there's drinking. We'll go, why? I'm like, because it's against my beliefs. I'm like, yeah, but we know heaps of Muslims. There's Muslims that are coming that drink. I'm like, well, and that's what stuffs it up. If you guys if you actually cared about the deen, not all born Muslims, but the ones that are just blatant hypocrites, you cared about the converts and wanted them to do a thing, you wouldn't be setting such a bad example, making it hard for us. So many times I've been in a situation, or if it comes to shaking hands and all this kind of stuff, this is all plays in part when it comes to such events, and it all culminates at Christmas time when your cousins come around. You can't hug your cousins, you can't. Your family all drinks, but you can't drink. It's incredibly hard because for that family, that's the biggest time of uniting in the entire year. But you can't be involved in any of it. But then they think that you just are being an extremist because they know Muslims that aren't doing those same things. It's quite sad. So, look, when you want to go about it, it's a process. You guys do whatever you want to do, and as long as you feel like your intention is good, but also you can back it up with riwayat. that you're doing, because your intention can lead you down a path of Jahannam as well. So you got to make sure that if you're going to celebrate Christmas, do it in a way that would not be upsetting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as you know him. And that's as is explained in the riwayat. So I can't actually say anything more than that because, I'm sure even all of us struggle with how it goes about, balancing family and deen and all this kind of stuff, especially when it's so multicultural. But yeah.
Cheers for that, Ryan. And I just want to end on a quick note, and I just want your final thoughts, brothers. And that is, what aspect of, Hazrat Isa alayhi Islam's life touches you the most? Obviously, we have various incidences mentioned in the Bible about, some of his companions, which is again is another topic altogether about his disciples, how many disciples he had as well. But what part of Hazrat Isa alayhi Islam's life touches you the most, and what can we learn from that? Brother Abdullah, I want to ask you that first before I pass on to Brother Doug and Ryan.
Okay. Now, I mentioned earlier I went to a Christian university, so we were required to take Bible classes, and of course, a lot of it centered around Isa alayhi salam. And I remember going back and having to, kind of, look at where everything intersected as far as, what the Bible said and what's in the Quran. And the thing that really struck me the hardest is that, both of these, what you see in both is that Isa alayhi salam was sent to Bani Israel, and he was rejected mainly by the religious establishment of his time. And although he was rejected by the religious establishment, he stayed strong in deen, of course, which is which the prophet is going to do. But not only that, is that he was able to still show them why the deen that he's represented, that they're calling corrupt, is actually the deen that Allah wants for everyone. So, I think the Bible goes into a bit more detail about it all. But, especially if you're in the case where a lot of people, like you're in the background, for instance, like such as myself, who is coming from a Sunni background and then becoming Shia, you can kind of like there's a lot of it that can resonate with you when you're facing a community who is saying that everything you're doing is corrupt, that you're committing shirk, that you worship Imam Ali alayhi salam, and trying to be, trying to stick firm into it, and in the midst of all that is one thing that can really help keep you going. So I found myself looking back to it a lot of times when, I was faced with, with what my family were saying, what my friends were saying, and things of that nature. So I think that's the most touching aspect that I think both Christians and Muslims can look back on. This can be with anything. It can be with politics. It can be anything. Whenever you're trying to stick firm in something, and the other people are saying that you're the one who's deviant, when it's not necessarily the case. So,
thank you for that, bro. Thank you very much. That's quite touching, brother Doug. Any account of Jesus' life which touches you the most, and how we can kind of learn from that in this day and age?
Pretty much Prophet Isa's alayhi salam's patience, his caring attitude, his charity. They're all good examples to live by. One aspect about Prophet Isa's alayhi salam's story that resonates with me is both in Islamic narrative and Christian narrative that the Prophet Isa is coming back. So, and he's coming back in our narrative to assist the Mahdi, alayhi salam. And I think that where we can find common ground, that because he made a promise according to the Christian scriptures that he'd be coming back, and that's the one thing I really touched me when I was looking into Islam, is that they have this concept too of the return of Isa alayhi salam, coming back and helping to establish justice on this earth, especially in the world of right now that's full of injustice. So that's my hope. I put my hope in the promises of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bring justice on this earth.
Thank you for that, brother Doug. Ryan, any last wise words? We've got three wise men here: Doug, Ryan, brother Abdullah.
Just like all the prophets, anything that you find on them is, at least in our narrations, is incredibly inspiring. Some things that you might find on the prophets through the Israeliyat, if you're going to read into that, maybe doubt it a little. We can't be too concerned. We can't. I'm very big on, not being a rijalist and just reject hadiths left, right, and center. But there's a lot of hadiths that we have from relating to the prophets of Bani Israel that are kind of problematic. Regardless, any hadith that you'll find about Nabi Isa alayhi salam, any story that you find about him is inspiring. And you'll find that there's a lot of narrations that you can also find that are quotes that were in the Bible as well. For me, it's not so much the life of Nabi Isa when he first came to the Bani Israel that was the most impressive thing. It's the occultation that he is in, and it's the re-emergence that he will have alongside prophets. Enoch, as in Arabic it's referred to as Idris, which is which is essentially the foremost in learning, and that goes in line with the biblical and the Islamic narrative of him. Then you have Elijah or Ilyas, and he also was occulted. Nabi Isa alayhi salam, we just brought up, and Imam al-Hujjah, may Allah hasten all their reappearance, they're all going to be coming back together. And if you actually understood the scriptures of the past as well as our own, you would know that they each represent different epochs throughout history. And Imam Hujjah represents the Muhammadan epoch. Nabi Isa represents his own epoch. Elijah represents the epoch of Nabi Musa alayhi salam, and Idris represents the early epoch, the time of Nabi Noor and etc. They were taken up into the heavens to come back at the end of times for a certain reason, and it's to show that the Jews who leave a place for Elijah every night at their dinner table, that he's coming back. That Christ, that the Christians are waiting for the arrival of. That Imam al-Hujjah, who all Muslims are actually waiting for, whether they know who his real identity is or not. And Idris, who's the mysterious character, but if you look more into historical works, you'll find a lot of symbology relating to him as well. They're coming back to unite the entire world under what Islam is, and that's peace. True peace. So that's the most beautiful message of the whole thing. But if you want to look at what he did in his life, just being good to his mother. He was the best to his mother.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that was a special bond between both of them. Very beautiful.
Yeah. So that, and inshallah ta'ala, in the future, we'll be doing more videos like this. We can discuss and create dialogue regarding the lineage of Nabi Isa alayhi salam, his message, his goals, and etc., and how it relates to Islam and etc. But yeah, all the prophets were fantastic.
Absolutely, and we haven't even done justice to the topic of Hazrat Isa alayhi salam. We could be. I know, obviously, today's discussion is just generally about Christmas. So there's many things we didn't cover, but nevertheless, I'm gonna probably now end the show. What I will do is I'm gonna share the link for the live chat to join. So if you do want to come on, and you've got any questions, it won't be live. So please don't feel embarrassed. Brother Doug, Brother Ryan, and Abdullah will stay on just for a bit to take any questions. So. Viewers, once again, thank you very much for joining us. I just want to thank the brothers, Brother Abdullah, Brother Ryan, Brother Doug, and take care. Happy holidays, as they say. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Merry Christmas.
Wa alaikum assalam.